for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lenny Myers. Everyone calls me Lenny. I've been turning since about January of 2010, and then I retired from the Navy after 21 years. And since then, I've been doing quite a bit of turning, and I've sold a little bit of stuff. That's kind of where I'm trying to go, is maybe supplement my retirement, because that retirement check's not as big as I wished it had been. But what we're going to do today is I got rings. You can turn bracelets and napkin ring holders, all with the same type of jig system that I'm going to show you how to make. And then we're going to turn maybe two different kinds of rings. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to do the first, which is a simple ring, which is very easy to do. And I'll pass this around and show you, where's the camera at, Keith, so you can see. The kind of ring that we're going to do today will be this ring, which is a simple ring. I call it a simple ring because it's just turned around, there's no detail to it, and just got a super glue finish on it. So I'll show you how that's done as well. And then this is like a pen blank that I had. This is coffee beans and some some acrylic, some inlay. So there's all kinds of things you can do with a simple type of ring. The other one is like what they showed in the AAW magazine last month, I guess. They showed how to turn with the, they turn this way instead of around. So you're turning with it on the side actually. And then I have a couple of bracelets here that are turned just like the simple ring. And I didn't bring any napkin ring holders because I had no use for napkin ring holders. I made one set and gave them away, and nobody's ever asked for any more, so I had to make it. And the other type is what they call bent wood. So if any of you have ever had any leftover of your, what do you call this?
Veneer.
Veneer, right? The leftover veneer, small pieces. You bend this just like you would any other kind of wet wood around something round into a ring. I've made two of these. This is my second one. The first one was a failure. And the second one was not much better, but it's in here as well. And this takes much more time than either of the other two, but it's not turning. So I just brought one of those just to show. So I'm going to pass this around.
They're all mine.
You get to wear them, you don't get to look at them.
I'm also going to...
Got inventory on them?
Yeah, she's got the inventory on them. So this is, even though we're turning something small, you know, still safety. You know, take your jewelry off, wear your glasses, or face shield. You know, if you're not talking to a crowd of people, it might be easier for that. I'll pass these around. These are the jigs that we're going to make, or I'm going to show you how to make. And the way that the ring fits on this one, that's on here, the blank, that's how you really want it to be when you make this, so that you're not expanding too far, because sometimes when you expand too far, the ring isn't round. It gets kind of out of round on one side. One side will be thinner than the other. So I'm going to pass these. While you're taking a look at those,
So probably take on there.
I'll show you how it's made. All this is a, for today's demo, it's going to be 3/4 inch hole drilled in a piece of wood. And this is, I made quite a few pins. This is a leftover pin blank. So what I did was, I drilled a 1/4 inch hole in the end of this. I found the center on the other side. I'm going to mount this between centers.
Busy. Thanks.
And we're going to turn it, and the tools I'm going to use today for turning will be the, I like using the bowl gouge for the first part for roughing instead of a roughing gouge. Like I said, what we're making is the wooden collet, which is being passed around as well. And all this is an expansion collet, so whenever you put your tailstock in, it'll expand. So two things to do when you're doing this is, one, when you turn your tenon, you want to leave a small section square so that you'll be able to grip it with a clamp when you cut it on a bandsaw. Because it's much easier to hold it and be square if you're already square, instead of trying to hold something round to cut on a bandsaw. And then on the end, you don't want to go too thin, because if you go too thin when you go to expand it, there's a possibility that it's going to crack. And make sure the grain is running lengthwise, because if you do it the other way, the first time you try it, it's just going to snap as soon as you put any pressure on it.
Does each size ring need a separate mandrel?
It will, in a sense. Now what you can do to change the size of the ring on the inside a little bit is sand it. If you have a spindle sander, I have one of those that goes up and down. What do they call that? Oscillating spindle sander, right? And it just goes up and down, and you can turn it around. And then I have an actual ring sizer that I can stick it on and see what size. If somebody wears 8, most of them are 8. So.
And I think that we put on the website a couple of years ago.
Oh, the ring sizes.
The fraction, decimal, and ring size.
Yeah, and I think whenever I get into the actual turning of the ring, I'll talk about that a little bit more, about the ways of actually drilling the hole. So I'm just going to turn this just to show you. Doing what you would do with the roughing gouge. I'm just using my bone gouge. Straighten the tenon up. A lot of people I see, especially with newer turners, is they just jab this thing straight in. And whenever they talk about turning, it's always anchor, bevel, cut. People just jab this in, or they'll jab the skew in there. But if you actually ride the bevel, it cuts much better, and you can just ride it, get it straight. So that's basically what you want to do to turn. Of course, you want this a little bit smoother. The size of your ring will be determined by, where's this? Once you've drilled your hole, you go with your calipers inside, and then you can use your calipers outside. And then once we chuck this up, then that's when you would check to make sure that you've got this the right size. So right now, I left it big for what we're going to do, because I know I'm going to come back when I chuck it up. You know, sometimes when you put it in the chuck, it's not always 100% straight, because of the difference in the point here and the point here may not be exactly as the chuck is. So always leave this just a little bit big.
And if you didn't have pin jaws, you could make a...
You could take your jaws off and just stick it straight in the chuck. It'll hold it just as well, for those of you that don't have the smaller jaws. So any of the ones, so whenever you take these off, if you see, there's actually 4 levers that'll come in, and they'll almost close all the way. So you can go even smaller than this if you want to, and not use these pin jaws. I just happen to have those. So now what we do is we take this to the bandsaw, and I use this to hold it, because trying to hold that with your fingers and go with the bandsaw is probably not the best idea. And I like to keep all of my fingers, so I just put this on here, tighten it down, and then I take it to the bandsaw and I run it, rotate it 90 degrees, run it again, and I go back inch and a half past. That way it's going to actually allow it to expand. And then when that gets worn out, I can cut that off and bring it back a little further until it looks something like this. Once it gets here, and this is your last chance, you throw it away. Okay, so I already have one prepared. I'm just going to do a simple ring first, and that's just going to be maple. Now you see what I was doing there is that anytime I do a jig that I make on the lathe, I always mark where the number 1 jaw is, because I've had too many times whenever I don't do that and I stick it back in there and for some reason it doesn't line up. You put it on there and it's out of round, it looks like, and if you try to turn on that, it's not going to turn smoothly. So whenever you make this, it's a good idea to just go in there, mark the number 1 spot, and then on this I actually mark 3/4, so I know that when I drill a 3/4 inch hole, this fits the 3/4 inch hole. Are there any questions? And this is, I'll say with a bracelet, but it's just the ring. So what I did was, took a piece of wood, cut a hole, or drilled a hole in it, and then this is what I had left. And then I just rounded it on the bandsaw, because if you try to turn this, you have a good chance of this splitting right here, where the end grain is. Whenever your tool hits it, it'll lift that and peel it off, and then you're going to have to start all over with the drilling. And I found that drill bits work better on this than a Forstner bit, because if you use a Forstner bit, what you get, if you look on the inside of this, oh, you can see that. You probably can see it. I can pass this around. You see on the inside of that, it burned the wood. And that's actually from the hole saw, but that's what you want to try to avoid, because that means more sanding. Now, I mentioned earlier that I like to use the ball gouge for doing this turning. There's 2 reasons why I like to use it. This back side here is smooth, and if I want to move this ring one side or the other, I can just put it on here, and if I loosen this tailstock up, I can move the ring. So if it's wobbling, when I move it, I can straighten it where it's not wobbling anymore. Or if it's not set on my tenon or the raised area that I turn, then I can center it on that with this tool. And sometimes when you put them on there with a skinny ring, it'll be doing the side to side a little bit, but if you just take the back side of this where there's no cutting, you can just push on it and straighten it right up. Now whenever you go to put pressure on this, if you put too much pressure, turn your ring too thin, you're going to have a cracked ring. It'll be an adjustable ring with it anyway. So you want to make sure that you don't do that. So I'm just going to turn this to a simple shape. automatically curved. So I'm just using my tool and rotating. And by doing that, it automatically gives it that curve. That's a little bit wide, so I'm going to shorten it up some. Going to be, right now it's about just under 1/4 of an inch, I guess, is where I'm trying to shoot for. Because remember, we're dealing with wood, and if you go too thin, it's just going to break when someone tries to wear it, especially if they pick something up or anything like that. So. Now, on these rings, I like to give them just a slight undercut, so I use just a homemade parting tool, and it's about less than a 1/16 of an inch thick, I guess. And what that allows me to do is to come in and undercut just slightly, so that, am I moving around too much for you?
Just a bit.
Now can you see it? So that whenever I give it an undercut, so that you don't have that sharp edge on it whenever you go to sand that edge off of it. So that's the easy ring, and now I'm going to go through and show you the techniques that I use for finishing it on the lathe. What I'm going to use is super glue. So how many of you have used super glue? You can show me for turning. And so like pins or bottle stoppers or anything normally small, it's easy to do. It's much harder to do on these bracelets because whenever you do it, you get the super glue. And if you try to drip it and do it at the same time, what will happen is if you use thin, it'll go through the paper towel and you'll have a finger stuck with the paper towel. Or it'll leave streaks where the super glue cured right on top, but in another spot it's soaked through. So then you have these streaks and you can't do anything about it but sand a lot to get it out, hopefully. And if it doesn't come out, then you just have a piece that goes in the pile with the other firewood. So, I'm just scoot that over first. So this is from my pin turning days that I bought this, and I still use it. And what I've done, if you see the top, is I color coded each one of them because they all look the same whenever you lay them up here. And you only use a little bitty piece of this anyway when you sand the small ring. But if you're doing several of them, you know, instead of tearing a piece off every time or trying to sort through them to feel which one is which, I just mark the back of them as well with the colors so that I don't have that problem. So I'll just start with 600. No, that should be, I was going to start with 240 and then I'll work my way up to 600. It only takes a minute. gonna slow the lathe down. It's about 850. It doesn't take a whole lot because you've got such a small piece here. So now it's ready for the super glue.
And do you do that before you do your inside?
Sorry, the inside of the ring itself.
Yes.
Yeah, I do because it's on the lathe now.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, sometimes whenever this, when the collet expands, it's not always round. So your ring may not be 100% round, and if you put it back on there, now you may have just a little bit, just enough that whenever you, if you were to sand or anything again, it's going to change the outside of it.
Okay.
So.
You
No.
ever glue the ring to the jig?
I have, yes. Hopefully I don't do that today. Now what I have is thin and medium. I like to use thin first because it soaks into the wood slightly and it gives it a deeper look. Use this. You need this, Keith? I know you shot them over great.
I'm good.
They keep sending those to me. Now what I recommend is that you get a good quality paper towel, because if you use those 99-cent rolls of paper towels, you may have a paper towel ring that's looking like this. Because a lot of times what will happen is it'll stick and it'll wrap itself around there because of, this is a Viva. It's the ones that I've found for me that work the best. And I always, whenever I'm doing this, I wrap the seams on the inside so that there's nothing sticking outside. So whenever you touch with the glue, it has nothing to actually grab a hold of. And you want it to be about 6 layers at least for this thin, because it'll soak through pretty good on most of your paper towel. And I always cut it so I have a clean edge on there. Some new bottles. For this, I'm going to slow it down. That's as slow as this lathe will go. It's about 450. And it's going to take the super glue, and thin cures really fast, and you may even see a little smoke come off the paper towel. So just put enough on there to get the paper towel wet. See how fast it dried? I didn't even get all the way across the ring, and that one side's still dry. So. And if you take too much time, you see it smoking there? If you take too much time going back and forth, what you'll have is a rough surface, because the super glue will start to dry and then you'll drag it along, and it'll be almost like sandpaper rubbing the other super glue. So when you do it, just take enough to wet the paper towel. You don't want any dry spots, because if you go across a dry spot and it's got super glue on it, it's liable to stick. So just wet the end of the towel. Take one pass across. And you see I haven't used any accelerator because I'm using the thin. It dries quick enough that by the time you cut the piece off and put it on again, it's dry to the touch. So I put about 4 of these coats on there. And you probably want to have a ventilated area when you're doing this because the super glue fumes, especially when you're standing over it, it comes straight up and right in your eyes and your mouth. You can taste it and smell it. Next I'm going to use medium. Same way I did the thin. Just wet paper towel, and just do 1 time across. So I would do that probably 2 more times with the medium normally, but for today's purposes I'm not going to do that. And that's just a little zip kicker there for the drying it. And now for finishing the super glue finish, to get it shiny, they make these micro mesh padded sandpaper. So it starts at 1,500 and goes to 12,000. So you could do that, but if you notice, I already have, it's pretty shiny already, and it's smooth because of the way I applied the super glue. So I'm not going to do it that way, but if you do have this, you can use this, but remember this is acrylic now. And whenever you use it, if you use this dry, you can melt this. So it's best to have a little spray bottle. You would spray a little on, rub it across, and you'll see, oh, this is white wood, but it turns white because of all the super glue. So it's like almost like in a white acrylic. It's like clear coat, really, that's what it is. So this is plastic polish is what this is. So basically that's kind of what we have here. So I've sanded it just now with that 1,500. And then this only requires you to sand to like 8, I think. But this will give it a really sheen, real nice sheen on it. I'll spit the lathe up a little. I'll put some of this on. Speed it on up, polish it. You see there, I got it just a little hot. But you see the shine that's on there now, and if you feel it, it's like glass. It's so smooth. So that's all you have to do for the outside of the ring. You can take this off. And now when you drilled the hole, it's going to be just a little bit rough on the inside, like you were asking Kat about if I did the outside. I normally just take one of my pieces of sandpaper, usually about 320, and I just stick it in there and take my finger and just rub it around. And that'll take that any little edge or anything that's on there, or if it's a little bit rough feeling on the inside. And then You can sand that up to maybe 400 and then do the same thing as I did with the super glue here, but we're going to do it by hand instead of with a lathe. So I'll show you how that's done as well, or my technique. So that's just 320, I sanded it. And now what I would do is take this the medium super glue, just the same way I did whenever I applied it to the outside, but this time I'm going to apply it to the inside. I'm going to do it by hand. So I'm just going to take, I'm going to put a little blob on there. I'm going to rub it. I'm just doing one side right now. Does anybody have any other techniques they use for the super glue? Have you ever done it by hand? Scott, you said you used it.
Yeah, I use it in my bottle stoppers.
You do it by hand as well sometimes, like I'm doing right now. It's like a,
In fact, I just turn the lathe by hand and hold it there.
you just hold it.
Yeah.
You don't do it by spinning the lathe.
No, because lots of time when I do use it, I usually have either bark or some other stuff on there, irregular areas, and so I use it not only to finish but to hold that stuff in place.
Jim, he likes to just spray with lacquer. So another thing I have tried, it wasn't very successful, is I tried just dipping them in lacquer and then hang them to dry. And what would happen is no matter how much you try to wipe it off, whenever you hang it up to dry, the lacquer will just seep down, and then you're going to have a little bump on there, and that'll take a lot of sanding to get that off. So this has worked, and spraying it has worked as long as you don't spray too close, because it'll blow them around if you do spray too close. So that's the technique that I use on the inside. And I put about maybe 3 to 4 coats of that. And then I have, this is a piece of the spongy, and it says super fine. So anything Scotch-Brite or steel wool would even work. Then I just stick it inside. Sand that, any rough from the super glue. And then I would take my polish on my rag, run it in here. And then buff it, and then it would be smooth. So that's the simple ring we like to see.
From your pen making days, have you found any woods that are not too good with the CA finish? Or does everything work?
Walnut sometimes is porous.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you use like a walnut, it'll what'll happen is like I did with the 1500 grit whenever I sanded it, and I was telling you that you would see the white from sanding the acrylic. Well, what'll happen is the walnut is porous, and that white will stay inside, even though you would have to put like 50 coats of the glue on there to get rid of it, because no matter how much you sand, it's still porous, it seems like. So that's where I've had the most difficulty, is those types of woods that are porous. But most of your rosewood or something that's got that's very tight grain, then they do really well on it. I mean, some of you don't even have to do it. So I did get a little bit ahead, but when you're drilling these blanks, I'll show you things that can happen. And this has happened to me in the past. Is this was just a piece of I think this was Indian rosewood, And it was a cutoff because when I had it, it had a check in the end of it here. So it was cut off, but I still had some area that I could use. So I was drilling it, and I was going to make 4 rings out of this. And when I got to the last one, I didn't have it held down anymore because I was on the last one. Instead of rotating it, moving my fence, because I have a fence on the drill press, and then resetting it up, I thought I could just hold it by hand. Well, what happened is the drill went through, and you know what when a drill looks, right? So, and it took it and it rotated it and split it in half. So now I got 0 rings instead of 4. I could have gotten 3 if I had just not drilled that last one. But so that's one of the things to look out for when you're drilling these, is that you want to be able to secure them to your drill press, because if you don't, what can happen is it'll slam, possibly break, or it'll walk up the drill bit, and it didn't drill all the way really through. It's more like a slot that it went through because the tip of it went through, and then you'll have to try and get that back off, and then good luck at trying to, go ahead and drill that through. So make sure that you have this secured down with like a clamp or something that'll hold that. Okay, now this is the, how much time do I have? That's not time?
25 minutes.
25 minutes. Okay. This is the second type of ring. So instead of turning it this way on the lathe, we're going to turn it this way. So it's going to be on its side to turn it. So the same thing applies. We drill a hole. So this is the piece of wood that I'm going to turn.
I thought we were going steady, but it didn't fit.
It doesn't fit.
Okay, so.
So what we'll do is we'll turn that between centers. First, we'll put tenon on it, and then I'll turn it in the chuck. Any questions? No? Okay.
Silence.
Is everyone awake? Do we need to stand up and do jumping jacks?
What's your favorite wood to use for these? Does that be like the rosewood and so forth?
They seem to work pretty good. The rosewood does.
Cocobolo?
I don't have any cocobolo, but I usually turn free wood. Most of the time, I have sold a few of these rings, so I'm probably going to get some better woods, I guess, exotics, because they tend to look a lot better. When you use oak or maple, there's not a whole lot of grain pattern there, so people are just look at it and it looks like the one that you see at a checkout for $5 or whatever, so nobody's going to pay anything more than $5 or something like that. And if you've seen the rings in here, there's a big difference in these 2 rings, other than one's plywood. But if you look, one is much thinner wood, and then the other one is was thicker wood, like the one that I'm passing around. So that's how I was able to turn the end of it round there, whereas this one, there's no way to turn that end around. I'm just going to mark the center. And when I say I'm marking the center, you really want to make sure that you're marking the center of this hole. Because if you mark the center of the wood and your hole is one side or the other, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have one side of the ring is going to be thinner than the other because of the way that you drilled this. So what I normally do, I can do it on this one. what I normally do is take my compass and I would just draw a line straight across and then down. And that's where I drill. And that's the center. So that I know that whenever I drill there, that's centered and this is centered. So whenever I cut this wood off, I can just take my compass and come back down the side and I know where my center is at. Or should be.
So what made the difference there?
The reason I flipped that piece of wood around is because I want to put a tenon on here that I can grab with the chuck. And I want it to be as long as, without being wasteful, as long as it could be, so that I have more room to work around the chuck whenever I go to actually part this ring off. So I swapped that around, so that's going to be the top and this will be the bottom. So I'm just going to turn this somewhat round. I'm just going to get it to a round so that I can check to see if it's actually centered or not. If it's not centered, then we'll need to move it accordingly. So now I'm just going to check to see that whenever I cut the wood, if it's even all the way around. And you see here it's not. It's pushed one side. But since I don't have enough time, I'm not going to. So what you would do is just adjust this, just like whenever you made those figures, to where the wood, if it's off to this side, it's cutting more on this side, so we want to move this side closer to the wood. Closer to the tool rest. So we would you can't do it with points, so you would take this off and you'd have to use a cup center to move this over slightly. But I can't compare. Just in case. I didn't mark it. Now on this, I didn't mention this on the other one. But on this, if you look at the tenon, you see that? It's not square, as in, it's square to the ring, but it's tapered. Slightly, sort of like whenever Ed did his figurine, if you did a ball on the end, you can move it to do detail on the very end of it. Like one of those rings in there, I think, had that as well. And that's how I did it. Was you can offset inside here. If you don't do this and it's square, it makes it a lot harder to do because the chuck doesn't want to. It wants to straighten it back up. So that's the reason I had that tapered. Okay, now this is where it pays to have a light, because when you're looking at the halo, really, you can see, I don't know if you can get that on the top there. But you can see the actual hole of the ring when you're turning using the light. If you don't have the light there, it kind of shows up on the camera. It's much easier to see it with the light. So I can see how thick the ring is. So what I do is shaping. With my bowl gouge, and then come back with my detail gouge to get this thing ready to cut off. Okay, and that's the shape I want on the end. I'm not going to do any details on the end. I'm going to use my detail gouge just to do the final shape. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but I can see that what shape it's making to the round that's showing up. Not really. That's too bright. There. My small parting tool, once I know I have my shape right, and then I'll use the side of the parting tool here just a little bit to cut / scrape, I guess you could say, as I'm going in to do that final adjustment that I want it to be. So right here I can actually use the side to scrape just a little bit as I'm cutting in. And you can see that it's made that round shape, but I have just a little, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, there's just a little bit of a hump there, so I'm going to take that off. At this point, you're like turning a thin bowl or anything like that. If you try to go back out, you're going to get chatter and it will be very hard to get out. Slow the lathe down. Now, one thing I didn't mention on this is a lot harder to finish, especially on the lathe, than the other one, because there's no way to sand this, so it's mostly by hand. So that's why I call that the simple ring. This is a little more detailed because you're going to have to sand it somewhat. And then there's just that little piece on the end that you would have to sand off. Take a knife and cut it off and then sand it smooth. And then I use a belt sander or something like that sometimes and make the ends come in slightly, and then you round this over slightly just like I did with the other by hand. Or you can use your oscillating spindle sander that goes up and down, or you can just use this piece itself. Sort of rotate in here and sand that. And then for the outside, I've made a couple of sticks that have 80, 120, 220, and 320. And then I can use this to shape it, to take off this little nub, and then to make it smooth to the feel. And then these are for the inside, 220 and 320. And then you finish these. I usually spray these because the super glue, trying to spread it around on the outside and get it smooth. It's a little bit more, I guess you can see it if there's any flaws in it easier with the eye on this than you can when you've done it on the. So that's the two types of rings that I wanted to show you guys. Do I have any questions? No?
So what sizes do you normally make?
That was 3/4 inch.
That would correspond.
I'm sorry, that was 11/16 that I did today. 11/16 turns out to be about, I believe it's 8.
That's pretty common size for.
7.5, 8 is normally, depending on which finger they like to wear it on. She likes to wear a lot of them on her first finger. And you see some of the ladies these days that's where they wear a big ring. So if it's a big ring, that's where they would put it on their finger. Now for the bangles, same way that we did the rings, but this is much bigger. So I used a Forstner bit, and I left myself 3/8 of an inch probably, and then once I turn it around for the size of bracelet that I'm going to use. So this one fits on the back on here. So I had this is really two different sizes. I can use it here or here whenever I did the smaller bracelet. So like that's a child's bracelet, that's a medium, and that's a little bit, just slightly bigger for this one. It fits on. And now this won't work. So you have to come up with something else. And all I did was take a tailstock for the live tailstock, and I just made a cone for it. Well, now I have this type, and I can unscrew this, and I can just screw a piece of wood on and make one for it. But at the time, I didn't have this particular type. So this, you could probably pull this. Well, I've used it quite a bit, so it probably won't pull out. But this was just the live tail center, and then it punches in there. And now whenever you do this, a lot of times this is make a squeaking sound because the wood, right?
And
So
it's gone.
well, there's a way to get rid of that. Is you just take a little shoe polish or just the same wax that you would use on your table here, and you just rub a little bit of that on. It'll quieten it down quite a bit. Because what will happen is, when you press this in, this is going to expand, and it may not be exactly round now. So that'll cause this to slightly wobble, this is not going to wobble because it's in the tailstock, and then it'll make that sound. But put a little bit of wax, it goes away.